Certainly. Here's an expanded version of the keynote note 6. The consequences of inaction are just as severe as the consequences of bad decisions. People often think that by doing nothing, by remaining passive or avoiding making decisions, they can escape the negative consequences of life. They believe that if they simply hold back, stay in the background, or ignore problems, they will be safe from failure. But in truth, inaction can be just as destructive, if not more so, than making a poor choice. When you avoid taking action, you are essentially making a decision to let things unfold without any input or influence from you. And when you refuse to take control of your own life, when you allow circumstances to dictate your future, you risk allowing that future to slip away from you. The problem with inaction is that it is not neutral. It is not the absence of a decision. It is, in effect, a decision in itself. When you fail to take action, you are deciding to leave things as they are, to let the current situation persist. And more often than not, if you do nothing, the situation will get worse, not better. Problems left unaddressed tend to grow larger over time. Whether it's in your personal relationships, your career, your health, or any other aspect of your life, ignoring issues does not make them go away. Instead, they fester, they compound, and they eventually reach a point where they can no longer be ignored or avoided. Inaction, therefore, leads to a buildup of unresolved problems, and that buildup often leads to a crisis down the line. This is true in both personal and professional realms. When we procrastinate, when we put off making tough decisions or addressing issues that are uncomfortable, we are allowing those issues to grow unchecked. If you choose to avoid confronting a problem in a relationship, for example, you're not protecting yourself from pain. You're setting the stage for a much more significant conflict in the future. When you avoid dealing with issues at work or in your personal life, whether it's dealing with finances, poor health habits, or unresolved conflict, you are simply delaying the inevitable. The longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to address the problem, and the greater the consequences become. Inaction also breeds stagnation. Life is dynamic, and if you are not actively participating in it, if you are not making conscious decisions to move forward, you will inevitably be left behind. Stagnation is the state of not growing, not evolving, and not improving. When you stand still, the world around you continues to change, and you risk becoming irrelevant. The world doesn't wait for anyone. It moves forward. And if you are not actively engaged, if you are not taking the necessary steps to improve, you will find yourself falling behind. Stagnation is a form of self-sabotage, because by failing to act, you are denying yourself the opportunity to grow, learn, and improve. Furthermore, inaction has a profound impact on your sense of self-worth and personal satisfaction. When you consistently avoid taking action, you begin to feel powerless. You may start to believe that you're incapable of making decisions, that you don't have control over your own life, and that you're at the mercy of circumstances. This feeling of powerlessness feeds into a cycle of self-doubt and indecision. The longer you avoid making choices, the more you reinforce the belief that you're not capable of taking action. This leads to a further erosion of confidence, and the cycle continues. Inaction, therefore, becomes a self-perpetuating pattern that makes it harder and harder to take control of your life. Inaction also has a ripple effect on the people around you. When you fail to make decisions, fail to take action, or fail to show up in your relationships, it has consequences for those who are relying on you. Whether it's your family, friends, or colleagues, when you are passive or avoid responsibility, you put additional pressure on others. They may begin to feel frustrated, resentful, or burdened by your lack of involvement. Relationships, whether personal or professional, require active participation. Inaction in these areas not only stunts your own growth, but can also undermine the people around you, creating a toxic environment where no one is able to move forward or make progress. The longer you avoid action, the more damage you do to these connections, and the more distance you create between yourself and the people who matter most. On a larger scale, inaction can prevent you from realizing your potential. Everyone has dreams, ambitions, and goals, but without action, they remain nothing more than wishes. It's easy to sit back and daydream about the life you want, the things you want to achieve, and the person you want to become, but unless you take concrete steps toward those goals, they will never materialize. Inaction is the killer of dreams. It's the reason why so many people live unfulfilled lives. They fail to take the necessary steps to create the life they want. They let fear, doubt, or complacency paralyze them, and as a result, they miss out on opportunities that could have changed their lives. The difference between a life of fulfillment and a life of regret often comes down to the simple act of taking action. It's important to understand that inaction doesn't mean that nothing happens. Even when you fail to act, the world keeps turning and consequences will arise from your passivity. Often, these consequences are negative. Your problems grow, relationships deteriorate, and your goals slip further out of reach. But inaction is not simply the absence of forward movement. It is also a form of resistance to growth, an unwillingness to face the discomfort of making decisions and taking risks. Growth requires discomfort. You may think that by avoiding action, you are avoiding pain or difficulty, but in reality, you are simply delaying the pain that will eventually come. The most dangerous part of inaction is that it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. You might not see the immediate effects of doing nothing, but over time, the consequences build, and eventually you'll be faced with a situation where you can no longer ignore the damage that has been done. The real tragedy of inaction is that it steals your ability to shape your own future. By failing to act, you allow external forces to determine your reality, and you lose the power to change your circumstances. It's a slow death, but a death nonetheless, a death of opportunity, of growth, and of potential. Certainly, here's an expanded version of Keynote No. 4. Watch for the signs. Downfall is often preceded by disregard for truth. It's not always an abrupt collapse. Most of the time, downfall is a slow, creeping process, and it begins long before the dramatic consequences manifest. The most telling indicator of impending ruin is often a consistent and deliberate disregard for the truth. The small lies, the convenient omissions, the refusal to confront reality, these are the early signs that someone is heading down a dangerous path. If you pay close attention, you can see these warning signs in the decisions people make, in the way they justify their behavior, and in the patterns they set in motion. This is the first step toward their downfall. It's not as obvious as a sudden crash, but it's just as deadly in the long run. When people begin to disregard the truth, it is usually a sign of deep inner conflict. The truth, in its raw form, is often difficult to accept. It requires vulnerability, self-awareness, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable realities about oneself. But those who choose to avoid it by bending the truth or denying it altogether are setting the stage for their own undoing. The initial disregard for truth might seem harmless. Perhaps it's just a small distortion here or an excuse there. However, the more they avoid truth, the deeper they entrench themselves in a web of lies, justifications, and self-deception. The longer this pattern continues, the harder it becomes to break free. What once seemed like a simple lie morphs into an entire narrative that must be maintained, and eventually it becomes an insurmountable barrier between them and the reality they are refusing to face. This disregard for truth often shows up in the form of rationalizations. People who are heading toward downfall will often rationalize their actions, no matter how harmful or dishonest they might be. They might convince themselves that they are entitled to act in certain ways, that their actions are justified because of past wrongs, or that the ends will justify the means. But these rationalizations are nothing more than a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the discomfort that comes with admitting the truth. They are a way of avoiding the consequences of behavior that deep down they know is wrong. As this cycle of rationalization continues, the person becomes increasingly disconnected from the truth. And the further they get from the truth, the closer they get to the inevitable downfall that will follow. One of the most telling signs that someone is heading toward downfall is their increasing inability to accept responsibility. Responsibility requires a level of self-awareness and courage that many people find difficult to summon. It's easier to point fingers at others, to blame external circumstances, or to shift the blame onto things that are beyond one's control. When a person stops taking responsibility for their actions, they stop growing, They stop learning from their mistakes. They refuse to take ownership of their choices, and as a result, they stop evolving as individuals. Over time, this refusal to accept responsibility builds a wall of denial around them, and they are trapped in a cycle of self-deception. This wall only gets thicker, higher, and more impenetrable until they are completely isolated from the truth and from any hope of redemption or change. This pattern of avoidance also has a profound effect on relationships. People who disregard the truth and fail to take responsibility for their actions often alienate those around them. Initially, others might tolerate the lies, the avoidance, or the rationalizations, perhaps out of kindness or out of a desire to believe in the best of someone. But as time goes on, these small cracks in trust begin to widen. Lies eventually catch up with them, and people begin to see the person for who they truly are. Relationships start to deteriorate because trust is the foundation of every meaningful connection, and without truth, trust erodes away. The more someone disregards the truth, the more difficult it becomes for others to rely on them, and eventually those relationships will crumble. People often fail to realize that the signs of impending downfall are not always external. The first indicators of personal collapse are internal. The creeping doubts, the uncomfortable tension in the pit of your stomach, the quiet voice in the back of your mind that tells you something is wrong. These internal signs are often ignored or silenced because they conflict with the comforting narrative a person has built around their lies and deceptions. But ignoring these internal cues only leads to further self-deception and greater distance from the truth. The more a person disregards these signals, the more disconnected they become from their own inner compass, and eventually they will lose touch with what is real and what is not. The external signs of downfall, however, are easier to detect once you know what to look for. It might be in the way a person starts avoiding difficult conversations, or in the way they deflect blame when things go wrong. It might show up in a pattern of broken promises or empty commitments. It could be in the way they refuse to acknowledge their mistakes, or in the way they refuse to hold themselves accountable for the impact of their actions. These external behaviors often point to a deeper issue, a refusal to engage with reality, a refusal to confront the truth. The more someone becomes entrenched in this pattern, the more the foundation of their life starts to crack. The more they refuse to confront the truth, the more likely it is that the walls will come crashing down, and they will be forced to face the consequences they have spent so long trying to avoid. It's important to understand that truth, no matter how inconvenient or painful, is a force that cannot be suppressed forever. It will always find a way to surface, and when it does, the longer someone has avoided it, the more intense the reckoning will be. The downfall that follows the disregard for truth is often painful and dramatic, not just for the person who has ignored it, but for everyone around them. It's a reminder that while you can delay facing the truth for a while, you cannot escape its power. The truth will always prevail, and when it does, it will bring with it the consequences of your decisions, whether you are ready to face them or not. Certainly, here's an expanded version of Keynote Note 5. The seeds of today grow into the reality of tomorrow. Every decision we make, every action we take, no matter how small it may seem at the time, is a seed that will eventually sprout into something far greater. Our lives are the product of countless choices we make, whether we realize it or not. What you do today, how you act, how you treat others, and what you choose to focus on will inevitably shape the future you will one day experience. We often live in the present moment, caught up in the immediacy of what we see and feel. But it is essential to remember that the present moment is just a fleeting moment that will soon become the past. The reality of tomorrow is simply the result of today's actions, and we must understand this if we are to take responsibility for the future we want to create. What many fail to grasp is that the seeds we plant today are not always immediately visible. The effects of our choices often take time to manifest, and in the short term, it can be difficult to see where things are headed. You might make a seemingly small decision, choosing to avoid a tough conversation, taking a shortcut instead of doing the work, or dismissing someone's feelings in favor of your own convenience. And in the moment, it might not feel significant, but those seemingly small decisions begin to build a pattern, and that pattern will eventually determine the direction of your life. Small actions compound over time, and before you know it, you are looking at the consequences of a lifetime's worth of choices. The seeds you plant today are not limited to the big monumental decisions. They are also found in the small, everyday moments. They are present in the way you treat people, in the way you approach your work, and in the way you manage your time. How you act today will determine who you become tomorrow. If you choose to take shortcuts, to avoid responsibility, or to give in to negative emotions like anger or resentment, those seeds will eventually grow into a reality where those traits define your character. Similarly, if you choose to act with integrity, to take responsibility for your actions, and to treat others with respect, those seeds will lead to a future where your reputation is built on trust and honor. Every decision, no matter how small, creates a ripple effect that shapes the future. And the more you neglect the importance of your choices today, the more likely you are to find yourself reaping consequences you never saw coming. This idea of planting seeds also extends to the way we think about our personal growth and development. Growth, like any plant, takes time to flourish. You don't see immediate results after a single day of effort, just as you don't see a tree grow overnight. But with consistent effort, with the dedication to continually improve, those small actions and choices accumulate into meaningful progress. The commitment to learning, to pushing through challenges, to making the right choices when faced with difficult decisions, these are the seeds of future success and fulfillment. You might not see immediate rewards for the work you put in today, but the reality you will one day experience is rooted in the consistent choices you make. The more you invest in yourself today, the stronger your foundation will be for the future. Conversely, neglecting to plant good seeds, whether by avoiding hard work, giving into negative habits, or disregarding the value of personal development, will eventually catch up with you. It is tempting to take the easy road, to ignore the hard work required to grow, or to let the seeds of procrastination and laziness take root. But what we often fail to realize is that the seeds we plant today are the only ones that will grow tomorrow. If we neglect the seeds of discipline, responsibility, and integrity today, we will find ourselves in a future filled with regret, frustration, and disappointment. Just as a garden that is left untended becomes overrun with weeds, a life that is not carefully cultivated will become overrun with consequences that were never anticipated. There is also the issue of the choices we make with regard to others. The way we treat people, the kindness we extend, the respect we show, and the trust we build. These are all seeds that grow into relationships and experiences that shape our lives. The seeds of compassion and understanding can lead to deep, meaningful connections, while the seeds of selfishness and dishonesty will lead to fractured relationships and isolation. If you choose to act in ways that hurt others, even in small ways, those actions will ultimately shape the way you are perceived by others and the way you experience the world. On the other hand, if you choose to plant seeds of kindness, honesty, and integrity, you will find that the relationships you build will nourish and sustain you over time. The seeds you plant today are also directly connected to the mindset you choose to cultivate. Your mindset shapes your actions, and your actions shape your reality. If you choose to focus on negativity, self-doubt, and fear, those seeds will grow into a future filled with limitations, missed opportunities, and a lack of fulfillment. If, on the other hand, you choose to cultivate a mindset of growth, possibility, and resilience, those seeds will grow into a future where you have the strength and determination to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Your thoughts and beliefs shape your actions, and your actions shape the world around you. It's essential to recognize that the seeds you plant in your mind today, through your choices, attitudes, and perceptions, will grow into the reality you experience tomorrow. Understanding this truth is empowering because it means that you have the ability to shape your future right now. Every small decision you make, every action you take, every thought you entertain is a seed that will grow into something far greater. You are in control of the seeds you plant. And by making conscious, intentional choices, you can create a future that reflects your highest aspirations. The reality of tomorrow is being created right now. And if you are mindful of the seeds you plant today, you can cultivate a life of fulfillment, success, and meaning. Every decision counts, and every choice you make today is an investment in the future you will one day experience. The seeds of today truly grow into the reality of tomorrow. Certainly. Here's an expanded version of Keynote Note 2. Neglecting responsibility leads to inevitable downfall. It's a reality that many people fail to understand or perhaps choose to ignore, but the consequences of avoiding responsibility are profound and far-reaching. Every individual is faced with a multitude of choices each day, and the way they approach these decisions will ultimately determine their success or failure. Responsibility is not simply a burden or an obligation. It is a cornerstone of personal growth and development. When we neglect responsibility, we are choosing the path of stagnation, self-deception, and eventually downfall. At the core of neglecting responsibility lies a refusal to face the truth. It's easy to look the other way when faced with difficult decisions. It's tempting to deny the role we play in our own circumstances or to point fingers at external factors. Society, family, peers. There's always someone or something to blame if you are willing to give in to that temptation. But in doing so, we absolve ourselves of accountability and take away the power we have to create change in our own lives. This is a dangerous path to walk. The more we neglect our responsibility, the more we detach ourselves from the reality of our lives, and the further we drift away from the opportunities to correct our course. The immediate fallout of neglecting responsibility is often subtle. It starts with small acts of avoidance, like procrastination, making excuses, or passing the blame on to others. But these small acts compound over time. They begin to create a pattern of behavior that leads to larger consequences. Missed opportunities, broken relationships, or unfulfilled potential. What starts as a slight refusal to take responsibility for one small thing becomes an entrenched mindset that ultimately dictates the direction of your life. The more you avoid responsibility, the more your world shrinks, and the less control you have over your future. You can't expect to lead a meaningful, successful life if you are unwilling to own your actions, your choices, and the results they bring. This is where the downfall begins. It doesn't happen overnight, but it steadily erodes your foundation. As you continue to shirk responsibility, you become disconnected from the very process that enables growth and improvement. You stop learning from your mistakes, stop taking ownership of your failures, and stop actively engaging with the world in a way that empowers you to shape your future. You become a passive observer of your own life, waiting for circumstances to change instead of actively working to change them. In this state of passivity, you are powerless to influence your future. One of the most dangerous aspects of neglecting responsibility is the way it affects your relationships. Whether with family, friends, colleagues, or anyone else, the way you handle responsibility directly impacts your ability to connect with others in a meaningful way. People are drawn to those who take ownership of their lives, who are accountable for their actions, and who are willing to face the hard truths. On the other hand, when you consistently avoid responsibility, it breeds distrust, resentment, and frustration in those around you. Others may begin to see you as unreliable, self-serving, or incapable of following through on commitments. This damage to your reputation is often irreversible, and it can have a profound impact on your ability to build lasting, meaningful connections. Neglecting responsibility also creates a void within yourself. Human beings are wired to seek meaning and purpose in their lives, and responsibility is a crucial part of that. When you avoid responsibility, you deny yourself the opportunity to find purpose through your actions. You end up feeling lost, unfulfilled, and disconnected from your own potential. Responsibility provides structure. It forces you to step up, to take action, and to be accountable for the life you are creating. Without it, you are left adrift, without the necessary framework to grow, to evolve, and to achieve the things you truly want out of life. Moreover, neglecting responsibility can lead to a slow but steady erosion of self-esteem. At first, you may feel a temporary sense of relief as you avoid the tough decisions or responsibilities that you'd rather not face, but in the long run, this avoidance chips away at your self-worth. The more you fail to take ownership of your actions, the more you reinforce the idea that you are not capable of handling your life. You begin to see yourself as someone who is powerless, someone who is incapable of making meaningful decisions. This lack of self-trust only deepens the cycle of neglect, and before long you find yourself stuck in a self-destructive loop, unable to break free from the consequences of your own avoidance. The inevitable downfall that comes from neglecting responsibility is not always obvious in the short term. In fact, it can sometimes appear as though things are fine, Things might seem manageable, or you might convince yourself that you're getting by just fine, but over time, these small acts of neglect accumulate. The cracks in the foundation become more apparent. The opportunities for growth diminish. And the world around you begins to reflect your lack of accountability. You may find that doors that were once open to you are now closed. Relationships that were once strong begin to deteriorate, and the dreams that once seemed within reach are now distant, unreachable. Eventually, the consequences of neglecting responsibility can no longer be ignored. When that time comes, it's no longer a matter of simply making amends. It's about facing the reality that you allowed the situation to reach this point. The damage is done, and the path back may seem long and difficult. The fall that comes from neglecting responsibility is not just a personal tragedy. It's the natural result of refusing to take ownership of your life. It is a warning, a wake-up call that those who avoid responsibility will eventually find themselves at a crossroads, where the only choice is to rebuild from the ground up. Certainly. Here's an expanded version of Keynote No. 3, arrogance and dishonesty only delay the reckoning. There is something deeply insidious about the belief that you can operate outside the realm of truth, that you can deceive others and somehow escape the consequences of your actions. Arrogance and dishonesty may grant a fleeting sense of power, a false sense of control over your environment or the people around you, but they are never lasting. They are strategies built on sand, built on the fragile notion that the laws of reality can somehow be ignored or bypassed. But the truth is relentless, and no matter how cleverly you might weave your illusions, eventually the reckoning will come. And when it does, it will not be kind. Arrogance in its purest form is the belief that you are somehow above the rules that govern everyone else. It manifests as an inflated sense of self-importance, where you begin to view yourself as exempt from the consequences of your actions. This attitude often leads people to make decisions that are reckless, selfish, or even harmful, believing that their status, intelligence, or personal qualities will shield them from any fallout. But this is a dangerous mindset. The higher you place yourself on that pedestal, the harder you fall when the inevitable truth comes crashing down. Arrogance blinds you to your flaws, to your limitations, and to the reality that no one is above the consequences of their behavior. It is a slow erosion of humility, and when humility is lost, so too is the ability to navigate the world with wisdom and integrity. Dishonesty, on the other hand, is the refusal to confront the truth. It involves hiding behind falsehoods, creating facades, and manipulating facts to suit your own needs or desires. Dishonesty, while it may seem to offer immediate benefits, is ultimately corrosive. It damages relationships, erodes trust, and builds walls between you and the people around you. The problem with dishonesty is that it is a strategy that always requires maintenance. Lies accumulate, and soon enough they become a tangled web that is impossible to escape. In the moment, dishonesty may seem like an easy solution, a way to avoid discomfort or accountability, but in the long run, it demands even more energy to keep up the illusion. The cost of maintaining the lie is far greater than the discomfort of facing the truth. And with every lie, you lose more of your own integrity until you are left with nothing but a hollow version of yourself. Both arrogance and dishonesty share a common trait. They are rooted in avoidance. Arrogance is the avoidance of humility and self-awareness. Dishonesty is the avoidance of truth and accountability. In either case, what is being avoided is the necessary confrontation with reality. The truth is often uncomfortable, inconvenient, and difficult to accept. It demands that you confront your own shortcomings, your mistakes, and your failures. But avoiding it only ensures that you are building a future on a shaky foundation. The more you avoid facing the truth about yourself, the more likely it is that the consequences of your behavior will catch up with you when you least expect it. This delay of reckoning that arrogance and dishonesty create can be insidious. It may appear for a time that you have successfully avoided the repercussions of your actions. The consequences may be delayed, and you may feel as though you are getting away with it, but this is merely an illusion. The laws of cause and effect do not work on a schedule. They are not bound by your personal timetable or your desire to evade responsibility. When you act with arrogance and dishonesty, you are merely postponing the inevitable. You may think that you can cheat the system or manipulate others into seeing things your way, but in doing so, you are only digging yourself deeper into a hole. When the reckoning finally arrives, it often comes with a level of force and clarity that cannot be ignored. By then, the damage has been done, and the consequences are often much more severe than they would have been had you simply faced the truth from the start. The arrogance that once made you feel invincible will now seem foolish. The dishonesty that once seemed like a quick fix will now seem like a betrayal, one that is impossible to undo. And the worst part is that at that point, there is no one left to blame but yourself. You can't run from the truth forever. It will find you, no matter how well you try to hide. And when it does, you will be forced to reckon with the full extent of your choices. Arrogance and dishonesty also have a toxic effect on the people around you. When you operate from a place of arrogance, you begin to treat others as though they are beneath you. You fail to see them as equals, and you disregard their needs, their perspectives, and their value. This creates a rift between you and those who could have been allies, friends, or partners in your journey. Similarly, when you are dishonest, you undermine the trust that others have in you. You create distance between yourself and those who might have supported you if only you had been honest with them. Eventually, you will find that the people you've wronged or deceived are no longer willing to tolerate your behavior. You may find yourself isolated with no one left to turn to for support or guidance. It is important to recognize that both arrogance and dishonesty are choices. They are not forces of nature that control you, but attitudes and behaviors that you can choose to adopt or reject. At any moment, you can decide to humble yourself, to be honest with others and with yourself, and to face the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. This does not mean that you will never make mistakes or that you will never face adversity. It simply means that you will do so with integrity and accountability, and that you will accept the consequences of your actions without trying to hide or deceive your way out of them. Only by doing so can you avoid the inevitable reckoning that comes from arrogance and dishonesty. And only by doing so can you build a future that is based on truth and responsibility. You know, life has a way of showing us time and time again the consequences of our actions. It's not just a matter of what you do. It's a matter of what you refuse to do, of what you neglect to consider in your pursuit of personal gain or in the pursuit of your fleeting pleasures. Because there's a truth, a deep and uncomfortable truth that we often try to avoid. Your actions will come back to haunt you certainly. Here's an expanded version of Keynote No. 1, actions have consequences. Nothing escapes the law of cause and effect. We like to think that we can move through life without facing the inevitable repercussions of our decisions. But deep down, we know that's simply not true. The universe operates on principles of cause and effect. Every single action we take sets in motion a series of events that will unfold in the future. It may not happen immediately, but rest assured, it will happen. The choices we make today will always have an impact tomorrow, whether we recognize it at the moment or not. This law of cause and effect applies to every action, no matter how seemingly insignificant it might seem in the moment. Sometimes it's the small things we do that build up and lead to far-reaching consequences. A lie, a betrayal, or an intentional act of harm. These are not isolated incidents. They don't exist in a vacuum. Every action we take reverberates outward, influencing others and the world around us. The true weight of our decisions may not be felt immediately, but over time, the truth will always come to light. And when it does, it will bring with it the consequences of our actions, whether we are prepared for them or not. We often think we can hide from the effects of our actions, that we can skirt around the truth and avoid paying the price. We convince ourselves that we can manipulate, deceive, or hide our behavior, believing that the consequences will never catch up with us. But that is a dangerous game to play. Eventually, the web we weave will become too tangled and the consequences will become undeniable. The longer we go without confronting the reality of our actions, the harder it will be when the inevitable reckoning arrives. And when that time comes, it will be too late to turn back. The reality is, no one can escape the consequences of their actions forever. You might be able to avoid immediate fallout. You might be able to run from the truth for a while. But you cannot outrun the fundamental laws that govern existence. The truth will find its way to the surface, and when it does, you will have no choice but to face what you've done. Whether it's the breakdown of relationships, the loss of trust, or the ultimate collapse of your own integrity. Your actions will eventually lead you to a place where you cannot deny what you have done. And when that time comes, it won't be a matter of blaming others. It won't be a matter of pointing fingers or shifting the responsibility. We cannot blame our failures or our suffering on external factors. The consequences we face are the result of our own decisions. Our choices shape our lives for better or worse. And when we fail to recognize that, when we believe that we can somehow sidestep the repercussions of our behavior, we only delay the inevitable. This is why it's so critical to take responsibility for the choices we make, especially when we know they might lead to negative outcomes. We must be mindful of the impact our actions have on others. It's easy to get caught up in the moment, to justify our behavior with fleeting reasons or selfish desires. But in the long run, the law of cause and effect will always prevail. And when it does, we must be ready to face what we have brought into our lives through our own choices. It's not just about avoiding harm either. The consequences of our actions are not always negative in the conventional sense. Sometimes the consequences of positive, deliberate actions are what shape our destiny. When we choose to act with integrity, to show kindness, to invest in relationships, to put in the hard work required for personal growth, those actions too have consequences. They will come back to us. Perhaps in ways we least expect, but they will always shape our future in ways that are meaningful. Every good deed, every honest word, every genuine effort we make will contribute to the fabric of our life in a way that defines our character and our journey. We must also recognize that there are no shortcuts when it comes to the laws of cause and effect. You cannot skip the work, avoid the struggle, or bypass the uncomfortable truths that come with real change. Life doesn't operate on a system of rewards for simply wishing things were different or pretending the hard choices don't exist. The laws of cause and effect are relentless and unyielding. If you want to change your future, you must begin with the choices you make today. Every action counts. Ultimately, it's the consistent pattern of decisions, the accumulation of choices over time that shapes the course of our lives. No single moment will define us, but the sum of our actions will. And whether we want to admit it or not, we are always creating the conditions for the future with every action we take. The law of cause and effect is inescapable. It shapes us, it defines us, and it ensures that nothing we do goes unnoticed or unrewarded for better or for worse. Every action we take is a step on a path that leads us somewhere. And we must recognize that we are the architects of our own destiny.